Hello again, precious friends. Welcome back to the Carnivore Hippie. And today we're going to talk about overcoming shame and guilt. You know, it's easy to acknowledge that there are forces in our lives, within our lives, that are stressful, difficult, and often beyond our control. But it can be hard to separate our reactions to these circumstances from our self-perception. If we react in a negative or self-destructive way, we often simply scold ourselves and promise to try to do better next time. And then when we don't, we feel disappointed in that we've let ourselves down. On top of that, we often feel like there's something bad or unvirtuous inside us. And each time we repeat our undesired reactions to stressful situations, we are tempted to disapprove more, scold more, punish ourselves more in the hope that somehow this will result in some changed behavior. Well, my guess is you've probably realized by now that this doesn't work. You know, you can think of your primitive brain as a cranky, overstressed teenager. You probably know that this kind of disapproval and scolding is not going to result in a relaxed, productive youngster. It'll create anger, resentment, and rebellion. Your primitive brain is fighting and rebelling against your rational brain, and it can't really do anything else. Your primitive brain can only crave what it needs and then react when it doesn't get what it wants. So just as it is the parent's responsibility in a parent-child relationship to provide appropriate avenues for reconciliation and productivity, so it is your rational brain's responsibility for providing the constructive rather than destructive processes for the primitive brain for security, comfort, and expression. Unfortunately, most of us who struggle with undesirable behaviors never learned these processes. You know, maybe we had parents who never learned them, and so they were unable to model them. Maybe we just didn't have a whole lot of guidance at all, and we just were left to figure things out as we blundered along. Maybe we were even taught that self-compassion was undesirable and dangerous because it could lead to permissiveness and, immoral consequences. I myself had two parents that were absolutely well-meaning, but I had one parent who had been taught that a deep sense of shame was kind of necessary for maintaining an appropriate moral compass. And I had another parent that believed that, outside of gross misbehavior, like lying or stealing or violence, that kids should pretty much be left alone to figure the world out by themselves. So inadvertently, this created in me feelings of deep inadequacy, and along with the feeling that I should just figure things out on my own, that I shouldn't be asking for help. And this further led to contradictory beliefs that mistakes and failures were to be absolutely avoided, but that experimentation and exploration were also necessary. Needless to say, this led to a life of frustration and shame that led to the onset of clinical depression at a pretty young age. So there I was, unable to help myself and yet feeling guilty because I couldn't. So what do you do, in that situation? Well, what had to happen for me was stepping out of myself and learning to see my experiences as though I was looking through someone else's eyes. I realized through that I was being way harder on myself than I would have ever been on anybody else, especially people that I cared about. If the people that I cared about were deserving of forgiveness and compassion, then that must mean that I was too. And the way I came to experience this was by journaling. I personally was sharing my journal with someone who was trustworthy and supportive. And that did speed up the process and was very helpful. But I don't strictly believe that it's absolutely necessary. I think you can do it by yourself if you need to. Not everybody has that kind of a trustworthy person in their life. But the breakthrough came when I was able to see my story as though it were the story of someone else. At that moment, I felt such great compassion for this person that it nearly broke my heart. All at once, it was no wonder that I reacted the way I did. Considering the difficulties I'd had to contend with and the lack of training that I'd experienced, the ways I had learned to cope seemed totally normal and entirely understandable. All at once I knew, without any doubt, that my shame and guilt were not only unneeded, but were a stumbling block. Things that would hold me back. And I needed to do whatever was necessary to forgive myself, let go of shame, and learn to feel okay about myself as I was. Now, I don't mean that I wanted to feel okay and good about any self-destructive behaviors that I had. What I mean is that I needed to be okay with being where I was and understand that there were reasons and good reasons why I wound up using the coping mechanisms that I had. I was doing the best that I could do in any given situation at any given time. But because I didn't have the training or the knowledge or the tools, I ended up getting a lot of stuff wrong. And it wasn't necessarily my fault. And even if some things were my fault, it was okay to say, yeah, you let yourself get out of control because you didn't know how to not. And I could forgive myself for that. So I'm not saying that the process of getting there was as simple and straightforward as the revelation. I consistently tried to find reasons why being harder on myself was appropriate, how my situations were different than other people who were in apparently similar situations, why I should have known better, or I should have been able to react differently. But I learned that this too is part of the process. As unhappy as my primitive brain was, it still perceived these new ways of thinking and feeling as threatening or dangerous, and the old ways of feeling and thinking as comfortable and safe. So, learning to be compassionate and forgiving with myself was sometimes intense. intensely uncomfortable. Forgiving myself sometimes just felt so wrong. And yet I couldn't begin to explain to myself or to anybody else why that was. But I also learned that this too was part of the process. I just had to sit and feel the discomfort and understand that learning to be okay with feeling the discomfort and learning not to be afraid of it was exactly what would create the changes in myself that I was so looking for. So, my precious friends, if you have difficulty letting go of guilt and shame, if you have difficulty being forgiving and compassionate with yourself, I encourage you to write down your story. Now, I know writing is a mentally and physically difficult thing to do for some people. I get that. So if that's you, just record yourself talking about it. Don't worry about whether it makes sense. Just tell it as you feel it. And if you have someone that you can trust and count on in your life, let them read or listen to it and tell you how it makes them feel. If that person who you can trust and who you care about believes that you are worthy of forgiveness and compassion, don't you think that you can trust that you are? And if you don't have anyone you think that you can trust with that, then you can be your own cheering section. I encourage you to read or listen to your own story and try to imagine, what if this was another person, especially another person that I cared about, who is having these experiences? Do you think that you would be able to have compassion on another person who is experiencing these difficulties? Would you be able to forgive them if they expressed sincere regret for their mistakes and misbehavior? And if you can, or if you would, then you can let go of the shame and guilt that stands in the way of your real productive change. My precious friends, don't let needless guilt and shame prevent you from finding your vibrant, energetic life. Tell yourself or someone else that you love your story. Use their forgiveness and compassion to spur forgiveness and compassion in yourself. Learn to think in a forgiving and compassionate way about yourself and your past, and learn to tolerate the discomfort that that generates, and learn to understand that it's just your primitive brain becoming uncomfortable with new ways of doing things. It doesn't mean that you'll feel bad about yourself for the rest of your life. It doesn't mean that you're becoming an immoral person or that you're becoming permissive. It's opening the door to true freedom. I love you all, my precious friends. I bid you peace, love, and meat, and we will talk again very, very soon. Bye.